Hey, before we get started with the show, we want to let you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is sponsored by Audible.com.
That's right. They have more than 180,000 audiobooks and spoken word audio products. They're the leading audiobook publishers, and you can choose such comics-related titles as Sean Howe's Marvel Comics, The Untold Story, and David Haydu's The 10-Cent Plague.
Get a free audiobook of your choice at www.audibletrial.com/comicsalternative. That's audibletrial.com/comicsalternative and get started today. This is the Comics Alternative Webcomics, reviews of Ectopiary, Thunderpaw, and Split Lip Comics.
Countdown for blast off. X-5, 4, 3, 2, X-1, fire.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about webcomics.
That's right. And on this month's show, we're going to be looking at three titles. First, we're going to be looking at Ectopiary. This is a curious webcomic from Hans Rickheit. After that, we're going to look at Jen Lee's Thunderpaw. And then finally, we're going to look at an already completed webcomic. I guess you can call it that, Andy. Or completed stories that make a larger webcomic. This is Split Lip, and it is written, the stories are written by Sam Costello, and he works with a variety of different artists. So there's a lot for us to discuss on this month's show. But before we get to that, we want to let all of our listeners know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you'll find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are between 20 and 35% off cover price, and every single month you're going to find some incredible specials. And sometimes those specials will be at 45% off, sometimes at 50% off, but many times the discounts go higher than that.
That's right, and you may not be aware that on the DCB service site there's a link at the top of the page. You'll see a little green arrow called My Digital Comics. And if you click on that, you'll find a whole ton of stuff, and you can also find a lot of free products. I'm looking at it right now, and you can get a lot of single issues for absolutely nothing. In fact, there are 30 pages of individual issues that you can get for free.
Yow, that's a lot of free stuff.
And it's some good stuff, too.
Yeah, and they arrange things really nicely. So if you want to find out what the new digital releases are, just click on the New Releases tab or the link, and you'll get there. The hottest titles, are you one who like hot things? Then click on Hottest Titles, and it will show you a variety of things, such as Archer and Armstrong, Jesus E. Lee, which I've never heard of, and a variety of other titles. So it's a great site to go to. This is one of the sister companies of our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service. But whether you shop at My Digital Comics or DCB Service, you can't go wrong. So go to dcbservice.com or mydigitalcomics.com for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do, please be sure to send those guys an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
Yes, please do.
So, Andy, this is our 7th, I believe, episode of the webcomic series, and it doesn't seem like we've been doing this for a little over a year. But then again, last month, I think I said it's hard to believe that we've been doing this for 6 months.
Yeah, it is hard to believe. It's and we've been through so many great webcomics, and it's a lot of fun, because we're both. I think we told listeners the very first episode that we did webcomics. This is sort of an exploration for us as well. So I know that we both have learned a lot.
Yeah, and it's been fun, and I think that's one of the reasons why things seem to have gone so quickly, As they say, time flies when you're having fun. And what we do every single month is we look at 2 current and ongoing comics and then 1 already completed. So let's go ahead and get into the good stuff.
Yeah, let's.
Now, the first one we're going to be looking at, and this is something that is currently ongoing, it is Ectopiary, and this is created by Hans Rickheit. He is both the writer and the artist, and you can find Ectopiary simply enough at ectopiary.com. That's ectopiary.com. And in fact, if you do go to his website, before we get into the nitty-gritty of Ectopiary, you can also find 2 other webcomics of his are available. One actually did not start as a webcomic. It started as a print comic, a short book called Chloe. He has now put that online, and you can read it for free. And then another one he has that is current and ongoing is a really good one. I love this, is Cochlea and Eustacia. And Cochlea and Eustacia are 2 young girls who are, they're in masks and they're dressed in nightgowns. Now, I know it sounds kinky, but it's not really a kinky comic, so it's nothing blue or anything like that. But these 2 girls, Cochlea and Eustacia, are all the time getting into strange situations. And the situations they get into really exemplify the strange world that you find in much of Reichardt's narratives. Now, I think some of the strangeness we can see, well, not just some, a lot of it comes out in Ectopiary. But if you want a really good introduction to Rickheit's work, I think it was let me look at this. I have it in front of me now. It is 2012. Wow, I thought it was 2013. 2012, he came out with a collection of his previously published work. And the book is called Folly, The Consequences of Indiscretion. And there you'll find a lot of shorter works from Rickheit that have been collected elsewhere. Really, really interesting stories. Some of these I was already familiar with, but most I had not read before this book. So that's a great way of getting into or being introduced to Hans Rickheit's work. But another book that is absolutely fascinating, and this came out in 2009, I was about to say 2010, but 2009, is The Squirrel Machine. And it is a graphic novel, so it's longer form, and much of it reminds me of what we see in Ectopiary, but weirder. So if you, after listening to this podcast episode, want more Hans Rickheit, then definitely check out Folly or The Squirrel Machine. And you can also get his most recent book, which came out late last year, which is titled Cochlea and Eustacia, and it collects the first, I guess we can call it, narrative arc of the online Cochlea and Eustacia, and puts it in color. So it's the beautiful work.
You know, Derek, I've gone to my comic shop and I've seen The Squirrel Machine several times. I've picked it up, I've flipped through it, and I never have picked it up yet. It's one of those that you come back to and you think, oh, if it's there the next time, maybe I'll get it. But I've never picked it up yet, but I feel like I've probably read the whole thing because I have looked at it quite a bit. But other than that, I was not familiar with Rickheit's work. I mean, I've known of it, but I haven't really delved into it before now.
Now, one word I would use to describe most of what I've read of Rickheit would be surreal. But let me ask you this. After reading, so you're saying Ectopiary is your introduction to Rickheit?
Yeah, for all practical purposes, it really is.
Okay, so this being the only Rickheit you've read, do you think the word surreal applies adequately to Ectopiary?
I would say that it does, but the beginning or the first several web pages of this, I would not say are that really surreal. It's pretty much just a typical drama. And do you want me to go ahead and just tell the listeners how the setup is?
Sure, the premise, yeah.
Okay, the premise is, well, first of all, I should tell you that this webcomic started in 2009, and Rickheit has on his first page that he planned for this to be a 600-page graphic novel when completed, and he was going to post a new page once a week, but unfortunately that hasn't been updated since 2012. But don't let that keep you from starting what is a really, really interesting webcomic. The webcomic is drawn in bluish, greenish hues and black and white. And the way that it starts is we see a very rural setting, and we know that it's not quite in modern times. I'm saying this is like in the 50s because they do make a reference to a couple of 50s movies. And a young girl gets out of a car. She's been driven to a house, and the girl's name is Dale. And in the house, she finds her mother. And her mother is ill, but she's being treated by a doctor. And that doctor is Dale's Uncle Victor, who's taking fluid from Dale's mother's spine to help determine the cause of her seizures. Well, while she's there, Dale meets her aunt, and her aunt is reluctantly taking her on for the summer until school can start back up again. And her aunt says, "We'll find a more suitable environment with a better sort of people than those your parents left you with." So that gives you kind of an idea of what her aunt is going to be like. So Emily is in this house. Even though there are adults there, she's somewhat by herself quite a bit, except for some of the
Dale?
servants. I'm sorry?
You said Emily. You mean Dale?
Oh, yeah. Emily is one of the servants. I'm sorry. So Dale is there. And for the first part of the webcomic, things are just, it's pretty much just sort of I wouldn't say a normal family drama, because there's an element of mystery in there. And things get very surreal after that, Derek, as you said.
Well, in fact, where you just ended in setting up the premise is kind of where I was going with the question, asking you if you thought this was surreal. I agree that the foundation of this story is, I guess you could say, more realistic than most other things from Rickheit, at least the things that I've read. But there are parts of this story when Dale goes exploring, and we'll talk about this later. That's where things get really strange and wacky. But I do think that this is probably, especially at the outset, the most realistically based comic that I've read of Rickheit's. And I think it's that opening that drew me in, because having read some of the other things previously, for instance, Squirrel Machine, the various stories in Folly, and especially Cochlea and Eustacia, I was expecting this to begin in a kind of a mind-bending, almost surreal manner. But it doesn't, and there's something almost quaint at the very beginning of the story, with Dale being driven into this rural estate. And it's a really nice old house. In many ways, it reminds me of the house my mother-in-law lives in, although probably a little neater. But a really nice turn-of-the-century, or even before that turn-of-the-century home. So, but even under the veneer of this pleasant, rural, kind of bourgeois setting, there's something strange going on. And not even discounting the surreal elements about the weird things going on. What's going on with Dale's mother and then the father that she meets at one point. You're right to underscore the mystery that Dale, or we as readers, I guess, stumble into, because we sense that there's something wrong with the mother. You mentioned seizures. There are other issues that seem to have some kind of mental, psychological basis. We come to find out that Victor, Dale's uncle, is a doctor, probably a psychiatrist or some kind of, let's say, mental physician. He ends up doing things and operating on Dale's mother in ways that are rather dramatic, let's just say. And so, and then we get this sense, you mentioned the line of the aunt saying, we're going to be, this is a better place for you than staying with the kind of people that your mother left you with. And so it raises a lot of questions, What kind of mother is this? Where's the father? We learned that the father was, put in jail for something. What was he put in jail for? What did he do? And what kind of lifestyle did Dale's parents live? And who are these people that Dale stayed with? Bohemians, artist figures, what? I mean, that's the sense that I got. But still, there's a big mystery there. And I'm hoping that, as the installments come out, as the story unfolds, whenever it unfolds, we're going to be learning more about Dale's past and why she and her family are the way they are.
Yes, and that is something really to look forward to. And I like how you mentioned the especially the house that Dale has come to live in. And the interesting thing about this webcomic is, again, they make a reference. One of the things that I was thrown off of it at first was I wasn't really sure where we were. The cars looked like they might be the mid to late 50s, but then there's a reference to the Ingmar Bergman movie, The Seventh Seal.
That's right.
So we know we're at least in 1957. That's the year that came out. So we're probably in the late 50s. But the thing about it is the house, even though the late 50s, that's still, to us, that's 50 years ago. But she's in a house that looks like it might be, like you said, Derek, might be turn of the century. It might be 50 years older than that.
Oh, so at least. It's probably, it looks Victorian.
Probably Victorian, right. And first of all, the art is just absolutely wonderful, especially the rendering of the architecture. There's just so much really exquisite detail. Exquisite's really the only word that comes to mind. But again, the thing I want to underscore is it looks like that we are being played with a little bit in time. We're in a story that took place 50 years ago, and then the house itself looks like it's at least 50 years older than that. So there's a really strange time element going on there. And again, what you mentioned about the doctor and again, we're reminded of time, and we're thinking, are the types of things that he's treating her with and for, would those be the types of things that really would have happened in the 50s, or is it older? So there's this constant questioning of time. What time are we in? Is this the right time for this to be happening?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Now, we haven't gotten into much detail about the surreal elements that come into play. And I think that this part of the story is introduced to us through this, I guess we could call it ghostly or ghost-like white dog. Mm-hmm. It's a big dog. Soon after Dale gets to this house, one evening, it may be her first evening in the house, she's looking out the window and she sees, sitting in a tree, this big white dog. And she doesn't know what to make of it, and then it goes away. Mm-hmm. And then later on, she sees this white dog, and the white dog talks.
Yeah, we shouldn't say more than that, because
right.
That's there's some really, really cool stuff going on there. But
the dog, the large, and he's large, white dog becomes I don't know if you call it a guide or an intermediary, or one who introduces Dale to this other world. And it is, and again, I'm not giving anything away here, but she goes out into, I don't know if it's a garden area, but it's not deep into the woods, I don't think, is it?
No, it's. I got the impression that it was not very far behind the house.
Exactly, but it's this large fountain, mm-hmm. And when she first sees it, this fountain is intact. Mm-hmm. It looks like a working fountain. And you mentioned the detail of Rickheit's work. I mean, that's something you definitely notice in reading his various Folly stories, or especially The Squirrel Machine. So the way that he works with architecture, the actual buildings themselves, I think, is really impressive. But Rickheit brings that same kind of meticulous detail to the kind of strange, otherworldly, surreal experiences that Dale has. and much of this stems from, or at least comes from, the fountain. And so there's a lot of detail in which this is rendered. I mean, all of Ectopiary, I think, is highly detailed art. I think not to play down any of the artists that we're going to be speaking about today, but I think of all of the stories we're looking at this month in terms of the webcomics, Reichhart's is by far my favorite. I think the most detailed, the most meticulous. It draws me in the most. But maybe I was predisposed to like his art because I really loved Squirrel Machine.
Yeah, I was drawn into it as well, and I obviously didn't have as many contacts with Reichhart's work before this. But, one of the things about, Derek, we've talked a little bit about the surreal elements of the story. But for a surreal story, this is a very approachable story. Even if you're not a fan of surreal graphic novels, it's a very easy story to get into. And I think that's one of the things that we mentioned at the beginning is, the beginning of it is fairly normal. It's fairly easy to get your feet on the ground and figure out where you are. So, I think it does a really good job of both things. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why the surreal element works so well, is because we have the establishment at the beginning that, this is a real place, this is a real event, these are real people. This could actually have happened.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that strikes me, and we haven't even brought him into our discussion yet, is a character by the name of Cecil. Mm-hmm. Now, Cecil is a young boy. He's older than Dale, and in fact, I think we first meet Dale when, or I'm sorry, Cecil. When Dale is with some friends in town?
Yes, and Cecil comes along, and
with Emily too, one of the
Emily, one of the servants, mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm. And they're in town, and we meet Cecil. And then we see Cecil again when Emily is taking a break from her housework. She's out smoking a cigarette, and Dale's there with her, and Cecil drives by on his bike. And the reason I'm intrigued by Cecil is he's another level of mystery. You had mentioned what was going on with the mother and also the father. We're not really sure. Same thing with Cecil. He's someone who stands apart from other people. He seems to be different. And so I think in this way, he's very much like Dale, because Dale is an outsider. Dale doesn't seem to fit into her new home environment. She is someone out of space. And you mentioned time. Maybe she's out of time as well. But she's someone who definitely doesn't fit in. And I think Cecil seems to be someone who's a little offbeat, eccentric, and does not fit in. Very much like Dale.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, too, that I like about Dale, and this I'm sure is going to play a very important part later on, Dale most all the time has a camera with her. Mm-hmm. So that's a very important element to the story. And in fact, she and Cecil have a brief conversation about the camera. And Cecil shows her some things. Again, like you said, Derek, Dale is, she's kind of a stranger in this world. She doesn't really know many of these people, doesn't know any of these people except for her mother, but she's learning things. And one of the mysterious things about Cecil is this somebody that could be a friend to Dale, or is this somebody that could really mess with her life?
In fact, yeah, exactly. And, I don't want to give anything away here, but then again, I don't know what I could give away, because there is a moment, and you've mentioned it previously, when Dale has her camera and Cecil comes upon her and, he's asking her about the camera. And then she starts to ask him about this. It looks like a round cage on a big stick. Mm-hmm. And Dale doesn't know what it's about, and she doesn't know if it belongs to the house, if it's someone else's. And so she's out near that big round cage, and Cecil comes up, and he starts to get something from the cage, a bird. And so that's when they have a conversation. He asks her about the camera, she asks him about the cage. And so then he shows her what he does with the creatures that he traps in the cage. And so he takes her to this place and shows her into a room, and we don't know what happens. Mm-hmm. Next we see of Dale, she's in a field by herself. Mm-hmm. she looks a little different. She looks like something has happened, but we don't know what. So, I mean, I think you immediately think that she's been molested, but I think that would be too easy of an answer for this kind of story. But something's happened to her. And I think one of my frustrations with Ectopiary is the fact that I'd like for it to be updated more frequently so I can find out what's been going on. And, what did Cecil do with, to, or for Dale in that dark space? What exactly was he showing her? What actually did happen to the mother? And did she have beatnik friends that she left her daughter with? I mean, all these questions. Now, I think that those are great mysteries that really propel the narrative forward. But I do hope that Rickheit gets back to this. When did you say the last time this webcomic was updated?
The last time it was updated was almost 3 years ago. It was October 2012. Yeah, so I'm really, really eager to read more. And I don't know, maybe if we all contacted Rickheit, and said, please finish this, maybe he would give us some more pages.
Well, this is not the only comic that we've looked at on our webcomic shows that have been a long time in completion. Remember, one of the first ones we looked at was Scott McCloud's The Right Number. Mm-hmm. And actually, I think we treated that as a completed comic, even though it hasn't been updated in years and years. And in fact, Scott McCloud got in touch with me after we put up that show, and he said, great episode. I promise I plan to finish this.
Yeah, it would be great if we heard the same thing from Hans Rickheit, that he said, oh, wow, you guys talked about my webcomic. I think I'll finish it. And clearly from looking at his website, he's got a lot of projects going on. But, yeah, I would really like to see some more pages for this one.
Oh, exactly. And with the amount of detail that he puts into the art, as we've discussed, I'm sure it just takes a long time to do a single page. But it's well worth it. I'm willing to wait. And however long it takes, this is definitely a webcomic that I want to come back to.
Me too. So if listeners have not experienced this, I would say, please take a look at this one, and I think you'll enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. And he even sells the original art for each page. I think 1 or 2 pages someone has already bought the original art for. But at the bottom of each installment, it says, buy the original art for this page. And if you click on that, it takes you to basically a list of which pages, and by page number, he is selling and for how much. So, it looks like I just looked at the only one he sold is page 85, which is nice. But the pages go anywhere from, I think the least expensive is about 160. The most expensive is at 200, I think. Mm-hmm. So, it's within a general range, 160, 180, or 200. Let's see which page is a $200 one. 77. Okay, so that's one with a lot of birds in it. That's the aforementioned event where Cecil shows Dale what he does with all the birds he captures.
Oh, that's
and then
great.
It's right before she goes with him into whatever room they're going into, and we don't know what happens afterwards. So I guess if there's more detail, if there just thicker image, so to speak, then he's going to charge a little more, which makes sense.
Yeah.
But getting back about the talking about how the website is structured, we've talked a lot about the comic itself. But one of the things we like to do on our webcomics episodes is discuss what the website is like. Is it easy to navigate? Can readers respond? Is there a forum, or is an archive, a store, what have you? And so in Ectopiary, toward the top of the page, you do find a link for an archive. And if you click on the archive, it's pretty simple, straightforward, but it can quickly take you to whichever page you're looking for. Now, because the book is not divided into sections, you may have to hunt for the exact place where you want to go, because right now we have 115 pages of his, I guess, as you said, projected 600-page story. So you just click on one of those and it takes you to it, but there's no thumbnail image to tell you, kind of where you may be going if you click on one of those pages. There's a donate button, and you can donate It's kind of a simple, no-nonsense donation page. There's a little information on the About page, and I think this is where you got some of your info. It says, Ectopiary is a graphic novel in the making. I expect it will be about 600 pages in length when completed. Currently, I plan on posting a new page once a week, which I guess he's not doing anymore. Hopefully, in the future, I will be able to increase the updates to twice a week. Ectopiary does not fit neatly into any known genre, and that's for certain. At the moment, I fancy calling it, quote, science fiction, unquote. I may change my mind tomorrow. Readers familiar with my other comics are encouraged to suggest other categories to fill this critter, or to file under which to file this critter. So there's a little more there, but that gives you a sense of the About. And then there is a contact page where you can get in touch with Hans and his store. So this is where you can find copies of Folly, The Squirrel Machine, and Chloe. And apparently he hasn't updated this because I don't see the latest book, Cochlea and Eustacia, listed.
Yeah. And, one of the things, too, about this site, and as we've mentioned on other sites, this one is free from any comments, either from the creator or from readers. So you won't see any of that. You won't see any advertisements other than the donate or the store. So it's very streamlined and it's very uncluttered, which I really do appreciate. So if you're one of those people that really does not like a lot of banners or ads, this is probably going to be for you as well.
Oh, exactly. And in fact, kind of anticipating the rest of the show, we can say that none of the webcomics that we're discussing this month have areas for reader to respond. That's at least right under the art itself. And I don't think any of them have forums.
No, I don't think so.
No, so this is I don't think we chose to do it that way. It's just the way it happened.
Yeah.
Because I know we've commented several times before about how sometimes those comment areas can be a little annoying, and sometimes the artists themselves maybe inadvertently give away spoilers. But,
so there's none of that.
We don't like
here.
that. So there you go. If you want to check out the fun from Hans Rickheit, it's ectopiary.com. So check that out.
Yeah, we hope you will.
So, Andy, let's move on to the next webcomic we're looking at. This is another one that is current and ongoing, and it is titled Thunderpaw. And you can find this at thunderpaw.co, not com, co. So, Thunderpaw, one word. And this is by a creator that you and I have discussed just recently.
Yes, this is by Jen Lee, and we discussed her standalone short story from No Brow in the 17 by 23 series, Vacancy. And we see a lot of similarities between Vacancy and this webcomic. Vacancy was about a dog that was pretty much neglected in his backyard, trying to free himself into the wild, see what things are like out there beyond the house. And Thunderpaw explores some of those same themes, but with a little bit of a different setup.
Okay, so what is the setup?
Okay, I'm glad you asked. In the setup, we see two dogs. One is named Ollie, and the other one is named Bruno. And they are, like Vacancy, two anthropomorphic dogs. They can talk and think and everything. They're trapped inside a car. And I think it was Ollie that says, "They're not coming back, are they?" Speaking of their owners. So they're in a car, and thunder begins, and Ollie starts freaking out. And something smashes the window, and we figure out before very, very much time has passed that something apocalyptic is going on. This is a cataclysmic thing that's happened here, and they've got to get out of the car and escape. So that's the very, very basic premise, but there's a lot of things that happens during Thunderpaw's, I think it's 4 chapter run so far.
So far, yeah. And in fact, And I guess I'm skipping ahead to something that we usually talk about later on with a webcomic, but it's organization. It's not the most intuitive website to navigate, so you may have to click a couple or three places to find out that if you go to options, that is basically how you navigate the website, or where you can find, I guess, what you could call an archive. Mm-hmm. So under options, it gives you a chapter select. So right now it's divided into 4 chapters: The Brightest Night, Pinemead Heights, The Danger, and The Clear Skies and Sunny Eyes. And I said because it's not and, A-N apostrophe. So, and each of those chapters are divided into, I don't know, anywhere from 18 to 26 pages so far. Although we're only, I guess the most current installment is page 5 of chapter 4, which is Clear Skies and Sunny Eyes. Mm-hmm. So you can, though that's basically where we are, and it seems fairly early in the story.
Yeah.
Now, I think you did a great job of giving the premise, right? There's something going on with these 2 dogs. There's something apocalyptic going on. We never see any humans. They get out of the car and they have to journey their way home. They're trying to find their way home. So it's the journey that they undergo that becomes the core of Thunderpaw. And by the way, I guess the subtitle of Thunderpaw is In the Ashes of Fire Mountain. Mm-hmm. I neglected to say that. So that's the setup of this. But I think that there's something that we haven't touched upon yet that makes... I think it's its distinguishing feature of this webcomic.
Yeah, actually there's a couple of things that make it very special, and... It really reminded me of what you guys were talking, you and Andy Kunka were talking to Scott McCloud a few weeks ago when you were interviewing him, and you guys talked a little bit about the infinite canvas. And Thunderpaw takes much more advantage of the infinite canvas of webcomics than probably several of the other webcomics that we've looked at, especially recently. You can navigate several pages of this webcomic require you to scroll very, 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 very far down or across. So it really, truly is an infinite canvas. But one of the other things that this webcomic utilizes is animated GIFs as well.
Yeah, now, what did you think of the animation?
I thought it was very effectively done because this is an apocalyptic comic. There are things that some of the animated GIFs are like flashes of lightning or supposed to suggest thunder. Some of them suggest movement, action, violence, all of those things. I thought it was very effective, and I don't think it's overused. I mean, you won't see it in every single panel, but I think it's used pretty effectively.
Yeah, I think so too. Now, when I first started reading Thunderpaw, I think for the first few installments, I was of a different mind. It was getting on my nerves a little bit, but I hadn't acclimated to it yet. But once I acclimated to it, I understood what was going on and that there was a purpose to this, and that I would probably need to read in a different way. And I think that that's something to keep in mind. This is not what I would consider your typical webcomic. Definitely it's not static, but it's also different in the way that you described in terms of the infinite canvas, where you do have to do quite a bit of scrolling. Not in the majority of cases, but every now and again there are some quote-unquote, I guess we could call it pages, where you need to scroll way down or way over or back and forth. But it's the animation, I think, that really makes it stand out. And if you're not prepared for it, it can be a little jarring. In fact, on the very first page, if you go to thunderpaw.co, you'll see that the beginner page is an image of both Ollie and Bruno standing on, I guess this is a mountain, and it looks like the wind is blowing past them. It looks very windy, and that's the animation. But there's also a warning at the bottom left part of the screen. It says, "Warning, Thunderpaw can contain flashing colors and patterns. Please be safe." Mm-hmm. Yeah. So maybe if you're prone to epilepsy, I don't know. Could it set it off?
Maybe. I mean,
I don't know.
It's. I guess it's possible.
Yeah, but even its support. Us through Patreon words, those are animated, or at least the word Patreon is, supported by its readership on Patreon. Maybe we should animate our Patreon image to get more patrons, because I've been to Lee's Patreon page, and she has 117 patrons. So that's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
If we had 117 patrons, I'd be happy.
Maybe we could animate you and Andy, so like you could like move around or wiggle your ears or move your eyes or something like that.
Yeah. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah.
I'll get back with you on that. But yeah, the animation did take me a little getting used to. And if you go to the very beginning, for instance, if you click Begin, it starts off with the first page. You have kind of pulsing animated letters. It was the brightest night we ever saw. And then you click on the next page, and this is one of those that is actually kind of chunky. You have to scroll down, not too far, but you do scroll down a bit, and there's a lot of activity, a lot of information. For instance, at the top of the page, there's a dog sniffing. You can see his nose twitching. Then you see in another panel feet of, I assume, a dog. There are these eyeballs, and eyeballs become a theme in this comic, or at least up to where we are so far. And so we have these creepy looking moving eyeballs, thunder, the words "I am a good dog," more creepy eyeballs, this four-faced dog or animal thing, whatever it is, that we see every now and again, with birds, which we see often in this comic, flying by. So it's very, very active. The words, "I'm a good dog" again. And then you click on the next page and you see Ollie and Bruno in the car. Something's going on. And then for the next several pages, I think it's just a lot of animation. And I think much of it that kind of put me off at first, or at least I wasn't ready for, I thought about it later. What this does is it not only underscores the thunder that's outside and the chaos that they're experiencing, but also Ollie's inner state.
Yeah, and
because how would you describe Ollie? He is a little high strung.
Yeah, he is pretty high strung, and Derek, I'm glad you mentioned that, because when I first read through it, I thought the animated GIFs are really pretty cool, but is this a gimmick, or is there more to it? And I think there's a lot more to it. And I think one of the things that Lee is trying to do is she's trying to convey the fact that this world that her characters are in is unstable, it's volatile, it's not what it should be. And when you think about animals, if you have a pet and you think about what happens when there's thunder outside, I mean, I know my dog just goes nuts anytime there's thunder outside. Well, you take that thunder and move it to an apocalyptic level, of course animals are going to freak out. And so I think that the animated GIFs really convey what's going on in the comic really, really well. And I like how you talked about Ollie being scared. I mean, he's these guys really have really good characters developed by Lee. Ollie is scared, but he's also pessimistic, and he has kind of a fatalistic worldview. And there's a lot of really good exchanges. They're almost like a kind of an odd couple in some ways. There's a place where Ollie says, if I stay asleep, then I won't ruin anything today. And Bruno just wants to keep moving. He's thinking about what's coming up. He's thinking about better days ahead. Just trying to get home. And Ollie seems to think that they're being punished by this being called the Thunderpaw. And Bruno says, "Your mom told you these stories so you'd stop duking the bed." And then Ollie says, "Well, I still believe." So there's this great back and forth, kind of a buddy picture type of thing where they're arguing with each other, but you can tell they really do care about each other.
Yeah. And, later on, you mentioned that they're very different, almost like an odd couple. There is a pack of dogs that is following them from a distance, at least at first. And at the very beginning of the 4th chapter, one of them from this pack is looking at Ollie and Bruno through glass.
Binoculars?
Binoculars. Why couldn't I think of the word binocular? That's strange. But yeah, looking through in binoculars, and he's describing them, and he's describing them by their character. I think he calls Ollie the Grim One. Mm-hmm. And so basically that's how they're defined here. But so there's that, and you're right. The character does of Ollie and Bruno does drive this story and makes their journey so notable. But there are other things that I think keep coming up again and again as iconic themes. So I mentioned birds. Every now and again we see birds. Eyes keep cropping up again and again, almost as leitmotifs. And then you have that four-snouted dog or creature, whatever that is. It seems like something out of a nightmare, and it could be a nightmare. And in fact, when we see Ollie and Bruno at times, we're taken inside of them, so to speak. In other words, we get a sense of what's going on in their head, what their state of mind is, and so that's where things get a little strange, psychological, even surrealistic, to get back to surrealism as we did with Ectopiary. Right. But and then there's an occasion where they're very, very hungry and they come across some mushrooms and they eat the mushrooms and they go on a trip and we go on a trip visually with what they're experiencing. So I think that it's really ingenious what Jen Lee has done in taking us inside the characters' minds at times.
And Derek, one of the things that you mentioned, some of the themes that are explored, I think one of the important themes that's being explored here is one that was similarly explored in Vacancy, and that is the idea of domesticated life not preparing you for the outside world. Mm-hmm. There's a great scene in which the Bruno and Ollie find themselves kind of trapped in this big hole they were exploring, and they're come upon by these three fawns, and the fawns are very sophisticated, and one of them says to Bruno, "Your bravery won't take you that far when things are out of your control." So it's clear that these fawns have been living in the wild, and that they can tell right off the bat that these two dogs have never been out of domesticated life. They haven't never been out in the wild, and that the rules there are very, very different. Again, we see this also in Vacancy. So this seems to be a recurring theme, possibly in maybe all of her work.
Yeah. Now, I have to say, I'm only familiar with Vacancy and then Thunderpaw. I have not seen any other works by Jen Lee. Have you? Do you know of any other comics she's done?
No, I have not. So I'm assuming that this might be a maybe one of the themes that she likes to explore.
Yeah, and I would guess that Thunderpaw came first because we were discussing this before we started to record, but I think, even though there's no indicator on the website itself, but from interviews that you've seen, this actually probably started around the summer of 2012.
Yeah, I think I read an interview that said it was summer of 2012 when this started.
Yeah. So, yeah, it is a fascinating comic, and it's one... Does it say anywhere on it how often it is updated?
I don't think it does. Let's see if this says anything. Boy, that's really small print.
If you look at the main menu, it gives you, let's say, the chapter options. Continue takes you to the next installment.
Okay,
so
I found it. There is an about, and it says Thunderpaw is a dog buddy adventure comic by Jen. It is updated monthly at 5 pages as of March 2015, but hopefully with the support through Patreon, the updates can be bigger.
Okay, so where did you see this about page? Because I had a hard time finding it.
Yeah, I just kind of stumbled across it by mistake, I think. It is under Options. Click on Options, and then click on About.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's there. Yeah, so
it's there.
The chapter select is part of Options, but then there's the store, the support, I guess the Patreon link, and then the About. And, this gets back to something that I lightly touched upon earlier. This is not the easiest webcomic website to navigate. Mm-hmm. And so you may have to fish around to find the kind of information you want, like me fishing around and you telling me where to go to find the About page. And that's not the biggest fault that a webcomic creator could have, and I think that the story and what it does trumps any shortcomings of, let's say, navigability.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, this is a fascinating webcomic, and I certainly am eager to see more.
Yeah, I definitely will keep up with this. And again, this is another one of those comics, as we mentioned. None of them this week or this month have any reader response or any place for readers to respond or the artist to respond to reader questions. So what you have here is just the comic.
Yep, and I'm okay with that.
Me too. Andy, you want to look at the already completed comic that we're going to be discussing for this month?
Yes, let's do.
And that is Split Lip. And you can find these comics, yes, comics, it's more than one, at splitlipcomic.com. So that's one word, Split Lip Comic. And this is interesting in that we're treating this as an already completed comic, but it's actually made up of a variety of short stories. And the project of Split Lip is ongoing. In fact, if you go to the main page, it says that there is a new story that debuts June 22nd. In fact, you can, if you click on the Learn About It Here link, it tells you that the story is going to be called Doll's House. Okay, so that sounds interesting because when you're dealing with dolls, you know it's going to get creepy.
Yeah.
So this is something that has been going on since October of 2006 because that's the date of the earliest story. And the earliest story in the archive is The Executioner is a Lonely Man. And the most recent one that was posted, the completed one, was actually last month, May of 2015. And that story is called Unsub. So how would you describe? I don't want you to describe the premise or the context of any individual story, but Split Lip as a project.
You know, I was thinking about that, and my first reaction was these are kind of Twilight Zone-ish type of stories, but I think I probably have that wrong. I think it's more like another Rod Serling type of show, Night Gallery. And if you're a fan of Twilight Zone and Night Gallery, you know that Twilight Zone had just a lot of different things in it. You could have had, unexplained episodes. You could have science fiction. You could have horror. You could have comedy. You could have strangeness. But Night Gallery was mainly horror, and sometimes it was monsters horror, sometimes it was vampires, sometimes it was psychological horror. But I think that Split Lip, for me, falls more into the Night Gallery realm.
That's interesting. See, I too thought of Twilight Zone, but I think you're right that Night Gallery may be a better Serling analogy.
Yeah, because in a lot of those shows, even though I think probably overall Twilight Zone was a better show, I think that I think that some of the darker things were explored in Twilight Zone, and I think that's one of the things that Costello is trying to do here. And listeners should know that Derek and I did not read every story in Split Lip, the Split Lip library, which I think is about 40 or 41 stories. We both read a handful each. But I think those have to do more with I would say, Derek, the ones I read, see if you agree, there are more psychological horror.
I agree. Yeah, I think it's more psychological horror. Now, there are some that are a little more than psychological horror, and they're more, I guess you could say, fantastical, possibly even sci-fi-ish. But, I mean, not spaceship kind of sci-fi.
Right.
But... a psychological horror, I think, is a good way to describe these stories. In fact, on the website, I guess the Split Lip tagline is "Strange thoughts beget strange deeds," and I think that goes a long way of describing or explaining what all of these stories are about: strange thoughts and strange deeds.
And I like the fact that, all of these stories are written by Sam Costello, and some of them have been collected into graphic novel collections. but the art is by several different people. Now, he uses some of the same artists more than once, but it's kind of refreshing to have different artistic takes on a lot of these stories. I would say of the stories that I read, no two stories were the same or the same type of story maybe, but the art really did a good job. When I assume Costello chose the people, or maybe he asked the artists if they could do a certain story. However he did it, I think he's matched up the artist really well with his stories.
Yeah, I agree, and I do think that the variety of artists on all of these individual short stories is one of the strengths of Split Lip, because it does give you a variety. It's the same authors, the same writer, but each story is given a different visual treatment for the most part. And sometimes there's some similarities between or among artists, but not often. Mm-hmm. It's a different style, so yeah. I really do like that. Now, as you mentioned, neither of us read all 41, I think they're at right now, all 41 of the stories that they have here. And these stories range from, I think, 8 12 pages is about the shortest that I've seen, all the way up to 20-some, like 28. Mm-hmm. So some of the stories are longer, some of them are shorter, but they're all short stories. It doesn't take you long to read one individual story on Split Lip. Of the ones you read, which ones stand out that you would like to discuss?
Well, I read a few that were the really, really old ones, some of the first ones, and I read some of the newer ones too. And I think generally, Derek, I don't know if you spread yours out over time, but it seems to me that the later the stories got, the better they were. Although the early ones were pretty good, but I think probably the newest one, Unsub, and I think you read that one too, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I think that was one of the stronger ones that I read.
Yeah, I like that one, and I agree with you that the later stories as a whole seem to be a little more sophisticated than the earlier ones. And I don't know if that is because the later ones are more sophisticated than the earlier ones, or if I'm just expecting that the earlier ones, since they're earlier, may not. That maybe Costello was, working up to his writing chops, and then by the time he gets to the most recent ones, he's mastered his trade more. I don't know, but I just got a sense that the earlier ones, even though they're fine, they weren't as strong. So, for instance, the very first story that we have posted in the archives from October of 2006, "The Executioner is a Lonely Man." I thought that I liked that story, especially in the last pages, but it was a little confusing to me getting into this story, and I don't think that has anything to do with my dimness. Who knows? It may. But I wondered if it was Costello's storytelling or Leframbois, and that's the artist of this story, Brian A. Leframbois, and maybe I'm pronouncing that correct. I'm not sure. I don't know if it was his art that was causing a little confusion or the storytelling that wasn't complete. I'm not sure. But I think that it did come together really nicely at the end. But before that, I was a little confused in places.
Yeah, I read that one too, The Executioner is a Lonely Man. I thought the same thing, Derek, and I'm glad that it wasn't just me. You read through the stories and you feel like maybe it's the pacing, or maybe it's the art, or the way that the art is depicting the story. It doesn't. The early stories don't seem to flow as well as the later stories. Although this is still a very effective story. The Executioner is a Lonely Man is a really good one, and it's got a really good ending too. But I think you see Costello developing more of a fluid style and a fluid storytelling as we go further into it, for sure.
Yeah. And not all of the stories are horror or horror-ish creepy. I guess the second to the last, or the second most recent story up in the archive, which is 8 Days Alone, I read that, and that I don't think was necessarily horrific or spooky. It could be. Is that one that you read?
I did not read that one.
Well, this is it's told from the perspective of a young man, and he is living with, or I don't think he's married to, but he's living with this woman, and the woman goes for a trip with a friend, kind of at the last minute. A friend of hers was going to Spain with a significant other. The significant other pulled out. They broke up, and so this friend needed someone to go with her so the ticket wouldn't be wasted, and also for moral support. So the narrator's girlfriend ended up going to Spain. So the boy, the narrator, feels that he's going to have 8 days all to himself. So he's going to batch it, and it's about how he changes his living habits. As we do when our spouse may leave for a little while, and we sleep a little later. We maybe walk around in our underwear a little more frequently. I don't know, whatever you do. I don't want to get too personal here, but so this is a story about that. But then his girlfriend, the narrator's girlfriend, comes back. It seems to be a little earlier than expected. That's the sense that I got. And there's something about her that's different, and he can't really put his finger on it. But there are a couple of places in this story where there's something like creepy black goo that encases people. And at first when I saw this, I thought that this was metaphorical, maybe psychological, telling us something about his state of mind. And when we get to the last page, and I don't want to give anything away, but there's the suggestion that this kind of blackness that is creeping over, literally, people is engulfing the narrator's girlfriend. And again, I'm not too sure if this is literal or it's kind of a metaphoric black goo that's encasing the individual. But there's something about that blackness. I think that could be horrific, but it's not horror in the way that we find in some of the other stories. It's not outright overt horror.
Yeah, I kind of had the same reaction to a fairly recent one called Victims. And this one has art by Stephen Perkins and lettering by Laura Barton. And
by the way, I should have mentioned that the art of 8 Days... I'm sorry to interrupt, but the art of 8 Days Alone was Matthew Goik.
Okay. And also, I guess we should point out that, at least as far as I read, all of these stories are in black and white, although Victims has black and white with some red also. And Victims is about a man named Adam, who, in the very beginning, he's looking into a store window, and he sees a shop that has vintage collectibles, old tools, things like that. And these things bring up some memories in Adam, and he can't quite piece them together. And his girlfriend, Susie, is with him, and she's trying to help him piece things together. And you can tell that they've been together for a little while, and she's the type of person that's very patient and is willing to help Adam put things together. Again, he's trying to put together some of the memories that he either can't remember or has suppressed. And when he sees these tools and then all these vintage collectibles, something sparks, and it has memories of his dad dying. And the whole story is kind of a Adam coming to grips with the memories that he's had, and he realizes some pretty horrific things that happened. And I won't get into what they are. But the tone of the story is very, very. There's a lot of, you can just kind of feel that something terrible has happened in his life, and the art really, really works well with this. It's almost photorealistic art, but the backgrounds are very grayed out. It's almost like Adam is trying to see clearly in this world. It's very, very effectively done. And again, the horror is not a type of like slasher film horror. It's psychological, but it's extremely effective.
Now, that's one that I did not read, and I was looking through it as you were talking just now. The art also struck me as photorealistic. I'm wondering about Stephen Perkins, the artist's style here. It seems to me, and I don't know, but it seems to me that what he may have done is to take photographs, actual photographs, and played with them in Photoshop. And by saying that, it seems to me that that's what he's done. I don't want to suggest that that's a lesser way of making art. I think that's perfectly fine, if no problem. But it just seems to me that that is what Perkins is doing here, because these characters look very, very much like photos that have been filtered in some way through a program like Photoshop. But if it's not photos that have been doctored or played around with in Photoshop, then then Perkins definitely does have a very detailed, to a point, photorealistic style.
Yeah, and however it comes, of course, it's this is not a critique of whichever method he used or any other method. I just think it's very, very effective for this story.
Yeah, and also the use of red you mentioned. I think that works really well.
Yeah.
And if you're dealing with horror type stories, psychological horror or otherwise, then red is a good sole color outside of black and white to use. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are a couple of others that I'd like to note that I had read. I read two kind of back-to-back because there was somewhere on the site that Costello had mentioned creating a story called Straw Gods, and he pointed out that this is not the same thing as an earlier story called Straw Men, and he talked about the genesis of these straw stories, that I think he had a dream or he had some kind of fantasy that a creature spawned from a cornstalk. And so that led to his, sketches that eventually led to both Straw Men and Straw Gods. And they are somewhat similar. Now, I read the more recent one, Straw Gods, which was published in July of 2010, before the earlier one, Straw Men. And Straw Men, I'm looking for it now, that came out earlier, and I cannot find it now that I'm looking for it. Yeah, Straw Men in June of 2008. Both of these take place in rural settings on farms. Straw Gods, and the art in Straw Gods is by T.J. Kirsch. It's about a farmer during the 1930s, and he's living in the Dust Bowl. So you have a family who going through some very, very hard times. I mean, not only do you have the Dust Bowl, but you have, of course, the Great Depression. And the main character, the father, the husband, farmer, is, he's optimistic and he has faith. And he feels that if they have faith and they pray to God, then God will provide. What he finds at one point is that he's out with one of his, handymen or his helpers with a scythe, and he cuts himself, and he bleeds on the ground as he's trying to stop it. And then that blood, apparently, you get the impression, nourishes one of the corn stalks. And then at another time, shortly after that, and then after that incident, I think their pigs seem a little fuller because they were getting a little thin, and his farmhand was saying, I don't know what we're going to do. These, there's really not enough meat on these guys to butcher them. And so after he cuts himself, the pigs are a little fatter. And then another time he's out in the cornfield, and his dog, attacks a bird. And then as, the dog is chewing the bird bleeds, nourishing the corn stalk. And then after that, they get a little more benefit on the farm. And so the man comes to realize that if he bleeds or provides blood to this particular cornstalk, then what he prays to, a straw god, I guess, will help him, will help to alleviate whatever hardship he and his family is going through. And I won't tell you the extent to which this farmer will go in order to care for his farm and especially his family. But he does make sacrifices, let's just say. And the final reveal of the story, without giving anything away, leads back to the name, Straw Gods. It's not the same thing, but it's somewhat similar to the earlier story that I mentioned, Straw Men. This also takes place on a farm, and it's about a farmer who ends up killing. This is more an act of passion, a murder of passion, and it's what happens as a result of him trying to hide the crime.
Interesting.
Yeah. So those are two interesting stories. Is there another one that you would like to highlight that you've read?
I read a really interesting one called The Voice of Celia Darling, which is about a silent film star who is kind of struggling with making the transition into talking pictures. Sound pictures are coming, and fans are concerned, and Celia is concerned that her career will die because she's got an extremely shrill voice. And, of course, you can't really convey, that's very difficult to convey in a medium in which sound does not play a part like a webcomic. But we get enough of that. I think Costello does a good enough job with the story, and John Bivens does a really good job with the art to convey that, people are kind of cringing when she is speaking in real time. But during the movies, she sounds pretty good. So we find out that her co-star, who's named Donald Grayson, has learned secrets of sound from the East. And we don't really know how far east he's been or what he's learned and if this is a mystical type of thing. But it's a really, really interesting story about not only people trying to transition from the silent era to the sound era, but some of the things that could happen that may be a little bit supernatural.
Yeah, I'm looking at this comic now, just flipping through, and I love Bivens' art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
this
it's
is
really nice work.
Yeah, and we should point out that the artists in most of these stories that I've seen, or all of these stories, I think have really incredible art. Very different styles, but each very good in its own way. Another one that I read that I wanted to point out is actually the only adaptation, and I read it because it's an adaptation. It's called Make Westing, and this is a story adapted from a Jack London story, and this has art by Anthony Peruzzo. I like this, and I'm not sure if it is a faithful adaptation or not because I have not read this story from Jack London, but it's basically about this ship that is trying to navigate, I guess, around the Horn of what is it? Cape Horn. So it's the very bottom of South America, and they're having a hard time doing it. And the weather and the sea is just not allowing the captain to make westing, okay? Mm-hmm. So they can't get around the Cape. And it's what the captain is willing to do in order to make it around the Cape. And it's really interesting. Now, in a way, I think that this story is a little heavy-handed in the way that it's told because it is adapted from another work of literature, and the story from Jack London does have a narrator. So Costello does represent the narrator, especially in the early pages of this comic. And it's not that long. What is it? 12 pages long. And so you do have a voiceover, a narrative voiceover that sets the context. And so this is like the narrative voice that Jack London created. I'm wondering if there were maybe more strategic or other ways of introducing the story, the exposition or whatnot. In other words, do we necessarily have to have a narrator in the comics version of Make Westing? Maybe there were things that Costello and the artist could have done to maybe substitute for this narrator to set a context. But I don't know. It's an interesting story, and I find it curious that of the 41 short pieces we have collected here on Split Lip, this is the only adaptation. I wonder what made Costello want to adapt a work from fiction.
Yeah, and this particular work, too. I'm not familiar with this. I'm not real well read with my Jack London, so I don't know if this is a fairly famous story or not. Derek, you probably know quite a bit more.
Well, I can tell you it's not anthologized, so it's not one of those you're going to find again and again. For instance, it's not To Build a Fire. Mm-hmm. But it is interesting. I wonder what decisions what thoughts caused him. Yeah, I want to adapt that one.
Yeah.
And also Jack London, I mean, there are a few adaptations of his work, and in fact, I think there's a graphic classics collection of Jack London adaptations. But other than that, in this, I don't know of any other Jack London adaptations in comics.
Yeah, that's an interesting choice, like you said, and I don't know. Maybe we'll hear from Costello. He might let us know what his thoughts were. But one of the things that's clear. I mean, it's clear that Costello has read quite a bit of probably horror, prose, short stories, and comics as well. He knows his way around the stories really well. I think he knows the essence of what you can do with a horror story, and I think he's done a really nice job in all the stories that I read, and I get the feeling you feel the same way too, of bringing this to a short graphic novel type of form. Which and again, I think this is something that we need to see more of. I'd like to see more short stories in graphic form. I'd like to see more anthologies. And this is really a welcome website that I know I'm going to return to.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a very different kind of webcomic than about everything else that we've looked at. For the most part, we have looked at webcomics, whether they're current and ongoing or complete, that are longer stories. And some, like Digger, are much longer than others. Yeah. But we haven't yet looked at a webcomic site that is a collection of short stories. I think the closest thing we got to that was looking at an Emily Carroll comic, but we only discussed the one. We didn't discuss all of the comics or several of her comics on that website that she maintains. And we've also never looked at a webcomics that is a series of strips. So it's a little different from short stories, but maybe we can do that in the months to come. But in looking at the Split Lip website, you have the aforementioned archive, so it's fairly easy to navigate which story you go to. There is a series of reviews where Costello will include little blurbs from some of the reviews he's gotten. There's an artist and author bio. There is a store. So you mentioned that some of these are collected and you can buy copies of them, and this is where you can get them, at the store on Split Lip. And then a link to Facebook, Twitter, and then the RSS feed. And as we mentioned, there is no area for readers to respond, which is nice.
Yep. And there is a little bit of advertisement on the site. He's got a official horror comic award winner, which is nice to have, and then there's also an ad for the Age of Ethereum, Steampunk, and Sorcery, and I know Kunka wants to jump right on that.
But it's not obtrusive ads.
No, it's not. It's really just those two, and then the links that you mentioned. So it's not like you said, it's not obtrusive at all.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, that's something you can say, I think, of every single one of the webcomics we've discussed on this episode. Not only do they not have areas for readers to respond and artists to respond to the readers, but I think the websites are fairly minimal, but minimal in a good way. It's kind of stripped down, and it doesn't assault your vision, let's say. Because, there's some webcomics that we've read and discussed on the show that, it may be great stories, but there's just a lot of activity on the page with ads and everything. So none of the three of these have that.
Yeah. Yeah, this was a fun experience.
Started off with Hans Rickheit's Ectopiary, which you can find at ectopiary.com. Then we discussed Jen Lee's Thunderpaw at thunderpaw.co. And then we wrapped up with Split Lip. And again, that web address is one word, splitlipcomic.com. So, 3 really good stories, and Again, one of the reasons why we do this webcomic series is for us to introduce ourselves to stories that we may not be familiar with, and otherwise we may not have sought out. We should tell listeners that one of the things you and I do in the weeks leading up to each monthly webcomic episode is you and I go back and forth of, okay, did you find something that you like, or did someone refer you to something, or did you do a search, what did you find? And so, it's easy enough to find webcomics, but to find the kind of webcomics that excite us or think that, it's worth us talking about, that we want to learn more about, that takes a little digging.
Yeah, it does, but, that's part of it is a lot of fun. Sometimes it's a little frustrating to try to find stuff that we think is going to work for the podcast. But yeah, mostly it's a pretty good adventure.
Yeah, and we've said this before, but we ask everyone to suggest webcomics titles, so you can get in touch with us, as we will tell you in a few minutes, in any number of ways, or you can chime in on the forum. That's a great way of letting us know about some of the webcomics that you would recommend, that you really like, and you'd like to hear us discuss. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, this is a series about webcomics, but if you like the hard copy stuff, there's no better place to get it than at the website of our sponsor. Our sponsor is Discount Comic Book Service. If you go to their website, dcbservice.com, you'll find that they have incredible deals. Now, the specials for the month of June, as of this recording, they're not up yet, but they will be soon, rest assured. And you can also be assured that they will be deep and plentiful discounts, tons of discounts at Discount Comic Book Service. But you can also get your digital comics through them as well, through their sister company, and that is mydigitalcomics.com. So whether it's mydigitalcomics.com or dcbservice.com, a great place to get your comics fix. And after you do go to those places, get in touch with us and let us know the kind of things you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll see that on the right-hand side of your browser is a tab that says Send Voicemail. Click that, and from the comfort of your own desktop or mobile device, you can leave a message through the wonders of SpeakPipe. It's really simple. But if you want to be a little more difficult about it, you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
That's right. And if you want to find out the latest news on the blog and on the podcast, the best way is to connect with us on Twitter. And on Twitter, we are at the number 2, guys with PhDs, and we certainly appreciate all the people that favor our tweets and retweet our tweets.
That's right. That helps to get the word out. You can also email us. The show is 2guys@comicsalternative.com, but you can email me directly at Derek@comicsalternative.com. And Andy?
You can email me at Wolverton@comicsalternative.com.
That's right. You can also find us on Facebook, on Tumblr, on Instagram, and on Google+. We also have a relatively new YouTube channel, so if you get your podcast fix that way through YouTube, then you can subscribe to that channel. But you can also subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can also find us on Stitcher. You can also listen to us on TuneIn. But you can find every single one of our podcast recordings, as well as our many, many reviews and comics-related blog postings that we put up on our website, and that is comicsalternative.com.
Yep, all kinds of ways to find out where we are, what we're doing, and where we are.
Yep, and Andy and I have not decided yet what webcomics we're going to be looking at for July, but if you guys have any suggestions, drop us a line, send us an email, tweet us, and give us suggestions.
Yeah, we would appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. And until next month with another webcomic show, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy.
We'll see you later.